Hey y'all, welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Colton here with Brandon. BCS is over, except for Worlds. This is going to be the video that Brandon and I do at the end of every season where we go over everything that happened in the season that was. Longer season this time for the Bushiroad Championship Series because of the schedule changes. Worlds not going to be until May. Usually it's, earlier in the year, February, March. There's a lot to talk about, a lot of events, a high number of events, and a mid-season ban list. So there's a lot to get to. So we will jump into the data immediately. First, there are going to be two sets of data that we show on the screen. This one, the one we're going to go through first, is the data from the entire season. This includes every event going all the way back to Sacramento back in October. So 6 full months of data from 6 months of events. We will, in time, transition to talk about only the data from after the ban list, which dropped about 2/3 of the way through the season. And there's enough data from after the ban list that is, in and of itself, a thing worth looking at. But for now, we're going to start here with everything from the entire season. I feel like most of this is pretty self-explanatory. We're going to go through it kind of set by set. Total number of tops, top 8, top 4, wins, and what percentage of top cut the set or deck was. There were 288 total topping decks this season. So that number, that top percentage, is illustrative of what fraction of that 288 a specific set or archetype takes up. Also worth noting, this is the first season where we had cuts that were larger than top 8. Not every tournament had one of those bigger top cuts, so the numbers might look a little different.
We'll have a couple different series that had beyond top 8. We're focusing in on top 8, top 4, and the wins. But recognize in the number of tops those that had beyond top 8.
And crucially, and I think this is important, it does affect the way that we look at the meta. There are going to be some things that had much higher representation because of the expanded top cut in larger events. And I think that gives us a more accurate picture of what those decks' place in the meta is. And we'll talk about that more post-ban because it's a smaller sample size. The expanded top cuts mean that you get a lot more of the X2s. An X2 is a meaningful tournament result. So I think having that in the data set gives us a better look at how the meta actually shakes out. Because even in the context of an entire season of like 6 months of events, there aren't that many events. Like, in comparison to other card games or just how data sets work in general. There is a lot of margin for error. So increasing the data set, I think, is a useful way for us to get a better look at what the meta actually is instead of accidentally cherry-picking top 8. Having a bit of an expanded top cut for the bigger, more competitive events is a useful way to get a better look at the meta. That being said, all right, let's dive into the actual numbers. Of the 288 decks that topped a tournament in BCS 2024-25, 47 of them were from Slime. So a full sixth of the meta was Slime, which I think is a pretty healthy number for a meta, all told. However, of course, a lot of that has to do with the ban list and Slime dropping off after the ban list. And we'll see that when we talk about the post-ban meta in a few minutes. But for now, 36 top 8s, 16 top 4s, and 8 wins for Slime. Far and away the most successful deck within top 8, within top 4. And I think that might be why it got hit specifically. That might be the thing that kind of put it over the top because it was beating Hololive, Quince, and SDS in top four in the finals.
Yeah, well, realistically, especially when we're seeing as much slime as we are, especially even if it is just 1/6, it's still X. So you're looking at the well, at least one, maybe two every top cut kind of thing, right? Like that's what you're kind of that's what the numbers would tell you, right? So
Two or three in pretty much every top 16. And you as a player, if you are, if you go X2, the odds that you see at least one slime are very high. There were two decks in slime out of the 47 that did not play Mirren. One was Milam Benimaru, that actually won its event, and then there was an 8 standby list that made top 8. But that's it. Everything else ran Mirren, and it still runs Mirren.
yeah, absolutely. And I think realistically going forward, I think the expectation when playing into slime is you're going to see Murin. Now, what does that look like going forward? I think we're still going to see a little bit more of that variety, but I think for the most part, you're going to be seeing Mirren when you're playing into
Yeah.
slime.
Yep.
Like that, I think that's what the season told us, and that's what the season continues to tell us, even post ban, is that
Yeah.
that's what we're going to be seeing. And the fact that we see 7 out of the 8 wins being with Mirren, and that being above and beyond the most represented one in win column, regards to specific, actually also speaks a lot to the strength that that deck had, especially pre-ban, and even still kind of carried a little bit into post-ban.
Well, the fundamental challenge was breaking board. How do you break Mirren's board? Mirren gets its stuff down at 2, right? You slam the CX. So you get all of your stock back, then you go +3, and then you have these gigantic bodies on the board that can't be targeted, and you have to find a way to get over all 3 of them, right? Because if you crash into one or crash into, if you get rid of one or two, that's fine. But Mirren always goes an additional +1 at minimum, usually +2.
Well, in triple Mirren, most of the time gets the stock that it needs for the end game and the end game pieces to hand. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
an auto, it's automatically setting up for the end game.
Right. Right. And you don't need as explosive of an endgame in Slime specifically because Slime is
Mm-hmm.
so good at compression. Always has been, even when you're not running the level 1 Shizu memory stuff.
Yep, thinning out the deck, trying to make it as climax dense as possible to survive whatever your opponent can throw at you. Yeah.
It's not even, I wouldn't even say it's necessarily as good at compressing per se. It's not like it goes back, 8 out of 23. That's not really what it's doing. But what it is doing is it doesn't care about hitting its refresh point. I think that's the big thing. Because you are, when you combo, thinning your deck. And if you do it twice, right, if you get to loop the Mirren, you get to do it again. So those are all cards that are coming out of the deck. You also get to stock cards from your waiting room. So if you have a small waiting room, or if you have a small deck, excuse me, you're stocking clean out of waiting room, searching clean, right? You're in this small deck. You're still at level 2, so most people aren't going to try to hit you with a stock swap yet. And then you go into the next deck. That's, 6 cards that are out of the next deck that are clean, and then you do it again. Right? Because if you get to Mirren at 2-1-2-2, like you can play healers in this. You could double Mirren and heal. So you have options. There are lines. Obviously, playing you know, a game that plans on canceling is a double-edged sword. Because you can do all the things, right? You can do all the things to make sure that you're going to get your cancels and you still don't get them. Or you can get absolutely stock swapped into oblivion, right? If you go too hard into the stock compression, that can absolutely come back to bite you. So definitely some weaknesses for Slime. Like I don't think it was unassailable. The big thing though was it was so good, especially pre-ban, at getting triple Murin pretty much every time, getting the resources to get its end game together even without, a true level 3 combo. And dictating board enough so that it was actually getting even more resources, and that also gave it more flexibility down the stretch, right? If you're at 2-5, but you just won with 2 of your Mirrans, what's to stop you from just playing your healer and trying to cycle Mirren again? Thin your deck even more for when your opponent is about to probably go into level 3 so that you can cancel out and try to stay alive that way. I'm never going to be excited to play something that doesn't have a great top end. Like that's why I never jumped in on Slime, and I'm always going to be a little nervous about it. Like as a player, like I'm not going to pick up Slime because I struggle to play something that can't close from deep. Because the challenge with Slime is that if it gets rushed, if it just eats a bunch of damage and it's suddenly at, 2-5 and it's untapping on turn 4, and this is, they're looking for their first Mirren turn right now and they only have 3 stock and like 1 Mirren in hand because they don't have the level 1 now to fix. Like, if Mirren just kind of eats a bunch of damage early on, it does not recover as well as a lot of other decks, in part because it does not have a really good closer. If Slime goes to 3 first and they're looking across at someone who's sitting at 2-3, they're probably not going to close. So it's super important that Slime gets its cancels somewhere in the mid game, which is something that Mirren definitely helps you get. But if you do just eat a bunch of damage, you can't really recover from that with Slime. Like more so than these other lists. Like obviously damage is damage, but if you shove Hololive into level 3 and they're running Marine, Marine goes, okay, I'm going to do Marine, right? And I can close you. Or Quince, I at least have, I've got my Nino top end or whatever, and I can close. But Slime doesn't have that. So that's always kind of been the knock on Slime. And I think that's the thing that maybe really kept it from running away with this meta, despite being the most represented deck. It isn't that much more represented than Hololive or Quince. And I think the biggest reason for that is that it still does not have a great top end.
But like kind of leading into that kind of thing, a deck that did close while having similar numbers on top, did not have as many wins as Slime. In fact, we only really saw the 1 win from Chloe Maureen.
Yeah, and I think that the reason for that is this is not a great matchup for a 1k1 that does not intentionally play things that can break Slime. Because if you're in Hololive, how are you clearing board? How are you getting Mirren off the board? Is it your double level down that you can only bring out at level 3 if you have perfect color fixing? Actually, no, because you can't target, right? So Hololive does not have a great built-in way to beat a full Mirren board. You can get up there and you can contest it, but Mirren will always have the counter over it. And like there's a bunch of power pump in Hololive, right? Like there's so much you can do to give power to things. You can get over 1 or 2 of the Mirrens, but you're not going to break the whole.
Yeah. Not usually. And I think that one of the big things with that is that at that point you're beginning to switch off of what makes Hololive really good. You're switching away from the opportunity to just continue to plus on your side as opposed to trying to take away from your opponent's side. Like you have to focus the resources into board break as opposed to Slime where that's the natural progression of the deck.
With Hololive, you just get to play a half dozen of the best cards ever printed. Like that's the fundamental benefit of Hololive. And none of those cards are your level 1 combo. Realistically. right? And you can debate about which level 3 combo is better. But like you get to play the best drop searcher we've ever seen, one of the best climax swappers, one of the best brainstormers at level 1 with a soul trigger, right? You get to play a suite of perfect counters, you get to play tap counter. Like you get to play so many good cards just because you are Hololive. So it doesn't surprise me that there isn't a ideal early to mid game into Marine, right? Because they're all good. Like you just need something that can facilitate. Chloe was the most popular choice, but there was Kurane, there was Watame, right? You could
There was
play all
Kanata,
kinds of
yeah.
things. There was Kanata, exactly. You could play any number of things into Marine because Marine is a super consistent 3-0 closer, reasonably consistent 2-5 closer, and you just get to play a bunch of copies of a bunch of really good cards no matter what your list is. Unless you're 8 standby, in which case you're just not allowed to play the drop search.
With that deck being limited going into the season, it's not surprising that we saw very few of them. But the few that we did see come through did make it into like top four pretty consistently. Almost half of the 8 standby they
If
made
you were
top
playing
cut
something
made
that
into
got
top
hit
four.
really hard by the banhammer, and you continued to play it through the banhammer, then you're probably very dangerous on it. We talked about this last time with Overlord. 8 standby's in kind of the same boat. It got hit harder than I thought it did. When I first saw the hit, I was like, that feels really weird. That feels like a strange hit. But not having the consistency of that drop searcher actually does matter quite a lot for that list. I underestimated how much of a hit that was. And it's a shame because I actually think the 8 Standby Hololive list is really cool. And I think that it actually probably would have held Slime in greater check on its own had it not gotten hit. I don't think it deserved a hit. So I was a little bit sad to see it hit at all. And I'm kind of sad to see that it didn't get to do as well in this most recent season because of it. I still think it's a good list. And it is a list that I think is still going to be present in some capacity long term, in the same way that Overlord is. You're going to have the true believers who really know how to pilot it, who know how to get their advantage even without, the extra really good consistency piece. And those people are going to be very dangerous to play into going forward. The other list that we kind of skipped over a little bit is obviously the Gura list. There was one Oski Gura that topped, but overwhelmingly the choice with Gura is Kali. The first half of the season really felt like everyone was off of it. The second half of the season, people really jumped back on it in a big way. The deck is still really good. Like 2 Gura is still a lot of Gura. And you have to play 10% better than you did before. You have to make sure that you find your Guras and get them into your hand. But you also have 2 more open slots at the top of your list now for Aquas and Kalis or whatever else you want to play as kind of an off finisher. Because like the package doesn't have to change. Like you can still do so much. Like 2 Guras and 1 Ame does still 2-1-1-4, 2-1-1-4 plus the additional Ame swing, probably for 3 for 5 stock, which is still unbelievable value.
Sure, and like realistically, I think, especially seeing that deck very much come through with a suite of off finishers, it didn't necessarily matter what off finisher you brought to the table as long as there was some additional potential damage on the table. Like Gura itself closes from 3-0 pretty effectively with just 2.
But it also has the ceiling to close from deeper, right? And this is something we've talked about at length. Not going to get into it way too much here, but having access to something that can save a game for you when you need to close from 2-3, I think is still important. And I think that, for me, is why I'm going to continue to put Gura kind of above Marine in terms of, like, what I would want to be playing. Because even though you only get to run 2 copies of the Gura, even though it's slightly less efficient in terms of its stock, it just finds ways to win from deep in level 2 more so than Marine can. But that's just me. Nothing against Marine, which is a very, very capable top end, but I'm always going to want that I'm always going to want that high ceiling. And I think that that's something that Gura still brings to the table better than almost anything else in the meta.
That being said, jumping into Quince. Quince got a new release partway through the season as well. So we kind of saw a resurgence of Quince after that set released. Taking the majority of those spots and getting its two tops of the season. But we did see Itsuki and Ichika both make its way into that kind of top cut. But Nino, for sure, having the most representation and most conversion into top four and wins.
Yeah, and I think crucially, and we'll talk about this more when we get to the post ban section, 24 of Quint's tops came after the ban. And obviously, some of that has to do with the release of the new set, right? But I do think a lot of it has to do with the ban being lifted itself. Quince now gets to be the big dog. It gets to be the power game at level 2, at level 1, where you have to find a way to clear this board. And that is a niche that has to be filled by something. Especially because Bunny Girl is not that big and Nikkei is not that big, like defensively. So this is something that Quince, even into this upcoming meta, I think can still carve out a really nice little place for itself. Because Slime is, significantly hampered by this ban list. Quince has a bunch of power pieces, especially Nino. I'm talking about Nino specifically. Has a bunch of power pieces and has even more consistency pieces now with the new set for 8 Standby Nino. So I think Nino is, as much as there are a lot better tools to deal with standby boards now, not as many people are playing them because we haven't had a really important standby list in a second. And Slime was kind of filling that void of thing that is big and sits on board at level 2 and kind of dares you to clear it. Now Quince gets to fill that role, but it gets to do it with a more traditional standby game. And I think that having, in a world where you have real tools to deal with standby, I think that standby can be healthy. And I think that the 8 standby Nino list is a fun fit for this new meta that's going to try to keep things like Bunny Girl in check.
Well, I also think we got some enablers in the new stuff, for especially with Nino, to be able to like search out your standby targets and put them into waiting rooms. So you have guaranteed access to your standbys. But having that piece in play then also allows you to be able to um, bring that in instead of some of the other tech that was restricted. So you could bring back the charm event and have Nexel as an option in that deck as well. So not only you have the offensive standpoint of being able to push damage and have big bodies on board, you also have the ability to potentially prevent damage and survive an additional turn.
It's so funny. Like 5 years ago, when the Dow list first dropped in English, and it felt like, I don't even think it was 5 years ago, but when the Dow list first dropped in English, and it was the only thing that mattered for a full tournament cycle, it really felt like standby itself was like the problem, and at the time it was. But it's kind of funny that it feels like standby has kind of lost the arms race in the past couple of years. How the new 1K1 stuff is so consistent at getting its top end together and getting its resources over the course of the game that it's not even as worried about the board now. Like it used to be that if you couldn't crack the Dow board, you just couldn't win the game.
Mm-hmm.
But now, especially if you look at, like, the 1K ones that are good, right? Obviously, Bunny Girl coming out, Marine or Gura, Ichika for Quince. They don't care as much about board. They don't have to, right? Nothing they need requires a reverse. they don't even necessarily care about crashing because they're going to get their stuff. And I think it's interesting. I think that it's interesting how in the past few years, 1K1s have gotten so consistent and so good that the standby game plan has kind of the inherent weakness of, well, what if I run into something that doesn't care?
Well, I think also partly with that too is the introduction to more soul triggers on lower bodies.
Yes.
Like
Yes,
that
yes,
was
yes.
standby's one big thing was you could fit more soul trigger bodies into your deck, which then allowed you to potentially have more consistency in triggering soul throughout the game, regardless of whether or
And
not
that
you
was
had
how you made
climax.
up for not having 1K1 printed on your standby triggers.
Yeah, now that we're having zeros and level ones that have soul triggers on them, in addition to the combos or in addition to the utility piece that they bring to the table, these 1K1 decks also have the soul push on top of what standby would normally do too. So all of a sudden that advantage for standby has been lessened a little bit. Do I think standby though still has some ways it still edges out some of those things? Sure, absolutely. But at the same time, 1K1 decks are significantly better than where they were.
And I also think that part of that is it used to be that you would slam your level 1 combo, slam your level 3 combo, and you didn't really play another CX over the course of the game unless you like had an extra one in your hand, or if you were one of those decks, like an Aaron that was trying to loop its combo, right? But now you could just slam CXs over and over again, right? Like it's so much easier to get a CX into your hand that you can, even if you're not looping, just slamming a CX, or if you're in SDS or in Rimuru, you're slamming stuff at zero. You're slamming stock soul at zero, trying to do it over and over and over again. And that's also contributing to throwing more soul at the board.
Which is also why I think we see as much SDS as we do, right? Because you have that, because we bring that in, 30 tops with SDS, ultimately culminating in throughout that first half of the season for sure.
28
Mm-hmm.
of these are Hendrickson.
They had the combo where they were getting that advantage from as early as turn one to be able to slam climax, get resources back into hand. And it has the explosive finisher that you were talking about with Hololive. That ability to close from outside of 3-0 makes this deck very deadly. It also had the tools to be able to um, finesse your opponent's board in a sense of the stage, or remove or stock swap and Fumio at the same time to be able to just mess with your deck's compression. For even those decks that had great compression, they could pretty easily flood that back with a bunch of character cards to make it better for their burn force to stick.
But SDS, of course, was also hit by that ban list, and it got hit hard by that ban list, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Let's round out the back half of this real quick. Overlord, we kind of talked about Overlord at length a week ago. 17 total tops, 3 wins. 2 of those wins came after the ban. I think that to some extent, um, when Overlord got hit, there were some people who like kind of took their Overlord tech out. It definitely dropped off post ban though, like in terms of representation. But again, if you're still on Overlord, it's because you're a true believer. And if you're a true believer in Overlord and you've been playing Overlord for the past couple of years, you're probably very scary on it. Because when Ainz goes off, it's one of the most powerful things in the entire game. The issue with Overlord has always been its consistency. Mm-hmm. I don't know how well it plays into Bunny Girl and Nikke, but Overlord has maintained a position in the meta. It's definitely not the top 3 thing that, it was heralded as coming into the season. I don't know if it ever was, to be honest, but again, in the hands of the players that know it well, it's very dangerous. So I think those were like the 5 that everyone kind of knew were like the 5 that you have to talk about when you talk about this meta. Bocchi the Rock was very quietly solid. 11 tops, 5 top 8s. all on the same list, all on that uh, salvage bar list. And I mean, again, it's just another one of those really good 1K ones that does what it does what it wants, does not care what you have to say about it. And it doesn't worry that much about board. It doesn't it's going to get its cards, it's going to play its cards, and it's going to kill you. That's what it wants to do.
Yeah, and I think realistically, we can kind of say that about. So I think for the kind of remainder of the ones we have broken down here in regards to top eight, top four, and wins,
Mm.
things we can really kind of narrow this down into is that these are pretty consistent decks, but they are also decks that kind of really do one thing and one thing really well. And when that one thing is maybe countered in some way, it's hard for those decks to recover. Like Bochi the Rock is a pretty consistent, solid deck, but it also dies pretty hard to memory kick counter, which we saw a lot of in Slime.
Mm-hmm.
And so having Bochi the Rock having to face off into a field of slime made it more difficult for it to get some of those tops in that kind of way. Freerin, kind of a similar example, does a really good job of getting those events through, getting those things in place. However, especially when you're running the 8 pants build, you're running a power line that's pretty small. And especially when you have a limited access in terms of removal, playing again into slime or big boards can burn up a lot of resources very quickly. And so you have to kind of play around with that in some ways too.
I actually really like Freerin. I think that Freerin is still very competent. It has all of the good parts about Danmachi that Danmachi had a while back, but it has other better things to go alongside it. I'm partial to the trial deck top end. Like, it's basically Hendrickson at home, right? Just burn fours. It's pretty great. The 3-1 stock shuffle event in a deck that has a bunch of event stuff is really nice. I also think that it has a good level down event. So obviously slime you can't target, so that's not going to help you in that regard. And I think that that's probably the biggest issue is that like it Freeren's removal tools are good removal tools, but they're not board-based removal tools, right? Freeren is almost trying to play a blue deck. It's trying to play cantrips from hand to try to deal with boards and situations, as opposed to putting big guys on the board that kill your guys. But I think that with Slime being taken down a peg, I think Freeren is in a better position now, maybe going into this meta, than it was in the previous meta. I also don't think that playing into something like Nikke or Bunny Girl really disrupts what Freeren's trying to do. Do I think that Freeren is like A tier or anything like that? No, I think it's like very solidly middle of the pack. But I think that it has fewer really bad matchups now because what tech it has is better suited for the good opponents it's going to run into. Does that make sense? Like, I'm not trying to hype up Freeren too much, but I think that Freeren might play more fluidly into this upcoming meta than it has the past few months trying to deal with a bunch of stuff that can't be targeted. You know, the level 1 combo is reasonably big, but it does not have much of a level 2 game other than loop combo. So going through the rest of this quickly, Ruby, new set, still relevant, mostly choice standby, with some 8 standby in there as well. Spy Family, 10 tops. Like, Spy Family really felt like it fell off the edge of a cliff at one point, but it has found some play, especially post-ban. Its one win came pre-ban with the choice top end, but that is the only list that is not 8 pants. Chainsaw Man has also found its niche post its ban. A lot of Himeno Aki still. I think 7 of the 10 lists were Himeno Aki, still pretty relevant. And then Shauna really was here kind of as a counter to a lot of stuff. With Overlord getting hit, I think that really affects Shauna's prospectus, because that was kind of like one of the things that Shauna could do. Was deal with that and also deal with other kind of random burn one stuff. So still
I
around.
mean, anti burn is still important. I think anti burn
Yeah,
is always going to be a solid dark horse, no matter what meta you go into,
sure.
because burning is the most common way of dealing additional points of damage.
The challenge is that you still can't protect it if you're Shauna.
Yep, it's a challenge. The challenge really is that in many ways you're trying to play into a vanilla game,
Mm-hmm.
and does Shauna have the tools and pieces to make that vanilla game worthwhile?
Rounding out the rest of everything, Ayakashi Triangle, Guilty Gear, both had 5 tops. Guilty Gear with a win. Azure Lane, Oshinoko both had 4. JoJo's, Macross Delta, all on the Venus Link. Tokyo Revengers kind of came on strong at the end of the season. Again, another thing that shows up in the meta with Overlord and Slime kind of taking more of a back seat. Arifureta with 2, Avatar with 2 and a win, along with Adventure Time, which also topped twice and won an event. Blue Archive, Bang Dream Dao, Kaguya, Review Starlight, and Sword Art all picking up 2 as well. Konosuba, Licorice Recoil, Marvel, and Haruhi Suzumiya each with a single top this season. We have 6 decks that we do not have any data for. So let's move into the post-ban world. And the first thing you will notice is that there are a lot of Quints. 5 of them, as a matter of fact, all of which have gotten at least one top 4. Quints has 5 playable meta-relevant lists now, which is appropriate, but also kind of nuts. But we talked about most of these already. 8 Stand by Nino, much more consistent with the new stuff. Doesn't have to play into a board-based game with Slime. It gets to just be big. It gets to be the big thing that everything else has to find a way to get off the board. So yeah, like I think Nino is still pretty relevant. How relevant is Nino going to be in the new season? I mean, I think definitely relevant, but I don't know. Like, we'll have to talk about that more in 2 weeks when we do our big Worlds / Summerfest preview. But in the meantime, for now, in this moment, as we're recording this, Nino is the most represented thing at meta tables.
Yeah, which I think is, realistically, I think it makes sense. It's probably the strongest set that got released during season, and so post ban, to see that as the front runner is not a surprise. We also saw that for representation numbers, we saw a lot of quintuplets, so we know there's a lot out there, as well as the lot making that top tables. It's definitely going to be a force to be reckoned with going forward, for sure, going into the next meta.
And we've talked about this before, where people have a thing they buy, and like there are a lot of players who buy things because they're good. Not saying that that's bad. That is a value neutral thing to do. But there are people who buy sets because they're good. And when those sets get support, they are probably more likely to buy the follow-up, right? So Quints, the new Quint stuff sold well because people had Quint stuff already and went, oh, if I buy new Quint stuff, my old Quint stuff is suddenly one of the best decks again. So I think that we're going to continue to see a lot of Quints. That, and it's a reasonably popular thing. It's not, I don't think it's like Hololive, Slime, Spy Family levels of like mainstream popular. But it's definitely popular enough in the anime space that like people like it and all that. But it's also really good. And I think that that's like one of the big reasons why it's selling is because it's really good. And every set has pushed it forward. You have not, there were not any Quint sets you skipped. They've all contributed meaningfully to Quints being meta relevant. But yeah, HY's still around. 8 Pants, Miku finally has like a real deck. I'm still pretty excited about the 8-bar list. I think the 8-bar list is really fun. And then 8 Salvage, really the thing that didn't get much help, I don't think, in the new set by comparison. 8 Standby definitely the focus.
Well, and I think, especially since we've gone over a lot of this stuff before, looking at this as an overall perspective, some of the things that we see really strikingly here was quintuplets and Overlord really getting those additional wins. as well as like one, the representation of quintuplets, but realistically the efficiency of Overlord.
Yeah,
Those that
and
made it to top cut very effectively turned those into wins.
which is interesting to me because before the ban, Overlord goes 1 for 13, turning top cuts into wins. Post ban, it goes 2 for 4. But yes, I do think one of the big changes here, though, is SDS took a pretty hard hit. 80% of its tops come before the ban. This is where you see the two Escanor lists, the Meliodas Escanor. Both of those topped post ban. The hit was not big in terms of like number of cards, but the consistency and the value that SDS doesn't have access to now, I think is pretty significant.
I think SDS was kind of already on the down decline anyway going into this one, from what I could see as well. SDS had quite a bit early representation, but began to slowly fade as the season went.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it, realistically, I think part of that was also just there was some consistency issues with the deck, as well as like the resource generation part itself. Like you were building up resources, but it needed to be there was a lot of selection that needed to have to take place, and I think you were giving up too much board throughout the game. There were some things you could tools and you could do to make it happen. Like that's more of a generalization than an actual like diagnosis here. I think we saw a lot of SDS on that decline as the season was going along anyway, but then the ban list I think really expedited that decline.
Yeah, I think it's still present, but I don't know how present it's going to be in Springfest. Like SDS feels a lot like it like we've talked about this before. SDS is very similar to Chainsaw Man. They're very very similar, like pre-ban Chainsaw Man. They're very similar. I don't know how that archetype of like the level 0 stock soul into a whole bunch of kind of random seeming level 1s, right? Like some vague advantage generating ones into a big level 3. I don't know how that game plan plays into the fastest 1k1 maybe that we've ever seen in Bunny Girl. And the explosiveness of Nikke, right? Because those are two archetypes that are, they are the forerunners in their own archetypes. So I'm interested to see how an SDS list that is playing a. I mean, as silly as it sounds, SDS is playing a slower archetype than both of those decks right now. And I'm interested to see how that goes.
No, and I think, especially as we look towards the next season, keeping an eye on those two sets specifically, Bunny Girl and Nikke, to play into what some of these things are. We're definitely going to see some changes going forward too, but I think that we have a pretty good idea of some of the front runners of to add in that conversation through some of this.
File this under things we should have seen coming. Spy Family 5 tops post ban because Slime's no longer there. Like that's why. Like that's why. Like Spy had zero recourse to deal with Slime. None at all. There was basically nothing in Spy Family that could manage Mirren. And now that Mirren's meta share has been drastically cut, and the biggest thing on the board is 8 Standby Nino, which is still pretty big, but definitely less big. I think that Spy is in a window right now where it's going to be a little more competitive. Do I think that competition window is going to stay open? I don't know. Like, I think the big knock on Spy long term is that it doesn't do enough damage. Like, the top end is okay. Top end's pretty, mid tier. So, like, it's going to go up against a Bunny Girl deck that it can do its mid game game plan against. But what's going to happen when Bunny Girl gets ahead in the damage race and Spy has to close from 2-4? I don't know. I don't know if it can do that. Whereas Bunny Girl, it can. So, Like, I don't think the spy top end is bad. I just don't think it's as consistent in terms of closing from outside of 3-0 as it needs to be super relevant. But definitely in a little window right now. Like, the Worlds window, maybe, but also probably not, because by the time Worlds happens, both of those next decks will be out. So, like, the next week is probably a really good time to be playing Spy. Let's go through the rest of these real quick. We talked about Overlord already. Ruby, honestly, like, hasn't changed. Like, Ruby's relevance is not different between pre and post ban. Shauna, I'm curious to see what happens to Shauna. Bochi, still there. Chainsaw Man, like, just kind of going down this list. Nothing, like, on the top half of this group, there's nothing here that wasn't relevant before the ban, except for Tokyo Revengers, which it's that board game, right? It can now deal. It can now try to be the board guy.
Yeah, but I think we saw some of those things too. Also, just playing just the dual laners itself, that it can just also just stockpile resources quickly and effectively. Especially if you're going into a Quince meta where Quince doesn't have stock swap, building up that stock compression very quickly can be hard for anyone to deal with.
I don't think that anything down here on the back end of this comes super relevant overnight. Like Arifureta, Ayakashi Triangle, Blue Archive, Macross, Oshinoko, Freerin. Those are things that are all like I think maybe Oshinoko gets a little bump with Slime being gone. Or greatly reduced. I think that can help Oshinoko perhaps. But like the rest of these, I don't think they really care a whole lot about what they're looking at. So other than, like, we did talk about Freerin, like Freerin gets a little bump just because of how its removal plays. So it probably becomes a little irrelevant. But I don't see anything that's gonna like break out here in the bottom right of this graphic. Adventure Time, Avatar, Azure Lane, Guilty Gear, Licorice Recoil, and Haruhi Suzumiya, the only other things to get tops post ban. But yeah, I don't see anything like after Tokyo Revengers on this list that immediately pops up to me as like, ooh, this is extremely relevant now. Other than maybe Freerin. Like Freerin is relevant. I think Freerin is probably a bit more relevant than everything else that's on this end of this list, but I don't think anything is gonna climb super far at this point from like the C tier, B tier out of that group. So I think that's it for us. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another Clock Talk. This one is going to be our big season preview. We're going to go over all of the decks. So the stuff we talked about here, but in the context of the next meta. We intentionally did not talk much about the upcoming meta because that is next time. Get ready to watch Worlds and see the new stuff that's coming out. Obviously, Bunny Girl and Nikkei. Other stuff that's happening this summer. We're going to talk about all those things in the context of Worlds and Summerfest, along with all of the stuff that we just talked about here that remains relevant. So, be on the lookout for that in 2 weeks. Next week, I will have a video. Going to talk about some random Persona stuff that I think is kind of fun. It's at least a conversation that I think is worth looking at. So, we'll be doing that next time. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and have a good one.
We'll see you then.